It is time to sell my Rolexes, but not because Rolex decided officially to sell pre-owned watches, which will cause probably some changes in the grey market. But the rumors became true, and 2 years ago a Rolex AD official told me that they will sell pre-owned Rolexes. And I was like, yeah right, like Rolex will let you to do that. But it's happening, so I salute that. I am selling my Rolexes because I'm keeping money blocked in some watches that will never get the chance to be enjoyed as they should in my possession. I think Rolex is part of a maturity process inside of a collection, and once it's achieved, it can also be left behind for different other brands or other levels. So I would not recall that Rolexes should be definitive watches in a collection, especially if you don't have any anchors, meaning or emotional attachments to them. I belong to a world where a Rolex or a Timex on the wrist does not make the difference as it should have been relevant for a lawyer, let's say. As my 9 to 6 job, I'm a designer, and since I stay 80% of the time home, I simply do not justify to own or wear Rolexes or that many Rolexes. The only justification to own these watches so far was mainly for YouTube purposes. Benchmarking, comparisons, you know the drill. And since I do not make client engagement or travel anymore, but also don't go out that much either, when I'm going to an event or meet watch enthusiasts, I prefer to wear a Timex, a Bulova or a Longines, because in my mind I built a clear border between horology and currency items, so I'm more comfortable and more authentic with a piece with meaning on the wrist than a status one. And yes, for me, Rolex is not mentally a watch to wear and enjoy as a beater, but more as an amount of money, where you transaction values or hype, not necessarily watchmaking. And this is the same quote that I put on the Tudor Harrods video, and I find it very characteristic for the crowned brand. Because whether we like it or not, Rolex is not anymore a celebration watch which is supposed to mark an important moment, but more a transactional item for the dealers or for the opportunistic people. And with this statement in my mind, I've never succeeded to gain an attachment to a Rolex, and I'll probably never do. And when you live with this definition in your mind, the feeling of belonging does not exist. It's more a feeling of manipulating piles of money instead of having a meaningful object which represents something for you. In fact, I don't even know how I ended up having 3 Rolexes in my collection. I guess I was drawn too much into the social media hype, leaving behind brands that would have probably mattered more for me. And most likely I made the mistake to consider that more Rolexes in a collection makes it more of a collection, which in the end it turned out to be false. Because there can be life in a collection without Rolexes. In my view, there are quite a lot of brands out there which can replace Rolexes in a collection with success, without keeping important amounts of money blocked in such watches. And I can easily spot replacements for these watches, like a Tudor Pelagos 39 or a Seamaster instead of the Sub, a Santos de Cartier, even a Nevada Super Antarctic instead of the Explorer, and for the bigger brother, a Grand Seiko, a Black Bay Pro, or maybe climb the refinement ladder and go towards JLC, Vacheron, or Breguet. Why not? And personally, when the idea of selling these watches grew in my head, I mentally started to exclude them from my rotation watches. Once because I don't want to end up having a connection, although I'm not even sure I can based on my experience so far. But more important, the usage of these Rolexes can make me lose a lot of money. And when I consider to grab a Rolex from the box, my reflex is to forecast what types of activities I'm doing in that day and if it's worth to wear safely a Rolex. And this shouldn't happen. So I made a breakdown for each model and built a ranking with arguments to determine which one of these models should remain and which ones should go. And maybe this will help you to decide as well if you need a Rolex or if you are in a debate to keep a Rolex in your collection. The almighty Rolex Explorer 1, a legendary design with the iconic 369 dial cased on a vintage size, being faithful to the original model. And these are 2 aspects that intrigue me. The movement is great, 70 hours power reserve, plus minus 0 seconds measured in a week as accuracy. On the other hand, this 36mm, which is actually a 35mm, it's still too small for an adventurous watch. The size of 36mm realistically followed by a 20mm lug width and a less tapered bracelet would have been made this model to be surely more masculine and a better option for a lot of people. I was considering the 39mm version, but honestly I find it too big for such a watch profile. And my Super Antarctic confirms this. I find the dial a bit too big as appearance. And as I see it currently, this model works on a business casual outfit with a sweater because it slides beautifully under a cuff. But is it worth keeping a 7,000 plus euros watch only for a few occasions, formal or winter clothing? For me, sadly no. I am an opportunistic collector and I cannot afford to keep expensive watches for niched purposes. And although this is a tough all-around watch, the size in my opinion is less enjoyable for a bigger wrist. Because it's not necessarily about the wrist size, but more about the way the watch blends with the entire body. And for a 7+ inch wrist, this watch works, but lesser for a 620 feet person at 211 pounds. And then the Explorer 2 is on the opposite side, a watch with a lot of presence on the wrist. With too much presence, I would say. This one being measured at 42mm wears actually bigger, similar to a 44mm watch. The crown guards makes it visually bigger, the open dial but also the male links, which are almost measured to a 54mm lug to lug. And this profile of a watch cuts quite drastically from the enthusiast preferences for this Explorer. But for me that wasn't even the biggest problem with the Explorer 2. This watch has a superb and a refined radial brushed bezel, and despite the protection of the higher crystal, this bezel, if it gets scratched, it will decrease the value of it drastically. And obviously everything can be repaired or replaced, but the stress, the hassle to repair it and the money involved makes this watch to be the least appealing from the wearing confidence perspective. And it's stupid that I have these feelings, but as I see it, a Rolex, especially if it's like brand new, I see it as a watch that needs to keep its value retention, so the condition needs to be immaculate in my view. But as positives, this Explorer, unlike the other two, has a bit of meaning behind. I remember I bought it exactly when the channel made 1000 subscribers on YouTube. For me, as an important milestone, the arrival of the Explorer 2 in that period had a specific meaning, maybe a message. I don't know, but I consider it kind of a special purchase which had to do with the channel. And by the way, a subscribe to the channel would be more than welcomed. Thank you. As a conclusion so far, out of these two, I see a slight advantage of the Explorer 1 as being more comfortable, also being much easier to protect it from scratches and dings because the surface is smaller and the case is less complex. The 35mm version having also a slight advantage of the superior movement. And things are getting interesting once we reach the Submariner. And everyone will be like, come on dude, the obvious keeper, a no-brainer. But believe it or not, because I'm a diver's watches guy, I can't say I created myself a definition of what I need from a diver. For me, a diver is a colored, practical watch with a decent depth rating which I can enjoy in any circumstances when I'm working on vacations and other activities. But the Submariner, in my opinion, is a sober and a serious business casual diver than an everyday tool watch. Sadly, a watch that I cannot risk to take it with me on vacations. And a lot of people said to me, man, what a watch, make it a keeper and leave it as heritage for your kids, enjoy it, wear it. But personally I don't see it like an important asset in my collection, besides the money spent for it. And for some reason I lean more towards the Explorer 1 than the Submariner, if I'd have to choose from the design perspective. I mean, when I see the freshly repurchased Seamaster 300M next to my Sub, I always pick this one up to wear. I don't know why, but it feels more natural to me. So out of these three models as a selling priority, I see the Explorer 2 to be gone first, and then probably the Explorer 1, and the last one to be the Submariner. And as I mentioned, the last two are actually valuable content creation assets. They are very good to express and highlight ideas or simply for watch comparisons. And knowing kind of my reasoning behind each model but judged through your filters, which one would you keep? Or would you sell them all and grab something else? Please let me know in the comments section. I mean, thinking that you can get around 28,000 euros on them, I'm wondering what watches can replace these Rolexes. I'm curious to know your view as well. So that was it guys, I'm glad that I've had the chance to share my thoughts with you, and if you're new here, please consider subscribing for future episodes. Thank you very much, thanks for watching, and until next time, be brave but stay safe.